हाँ, तो इस सर्द सुबह आप लोगों का भी खैर मकदम। मैं तो कह रहा था इसके लिए भी एक इनकलाबी जज्बा चाहिए कि आप यहाँ बैठ के इस वक्त ये चर्चाएं करें। मेरे ख्याल से थोड़ा सा कन्फ्यूज, कितना टाइम बोला था आपने? 20 मिनट। तो is it okay if I speak only in one? Which would be preferable, Hindi or English?
Both, sir.
English.
Bilingual.
Okay.
English.
Beach में okay. So let me start basically by I want to make 3 points, and let me start by saying that this whole threat that we are facing today, the challenge of the Hindu right, which is now actually been in power for a decade, has very long roots, and sometimes we tend to not estimate that. So I'm actually going to talk about whatever I'm going to talk about. It is also going to be more from the point of view of how we fight it or how we confront it, because it is not just an academic question that we are discussing here. So that is why I want to emphasize that when you want to fight a beast, you should also be able to first know or understand what exactly are the kind of challenges that we are faced with. Often it becomes a matter of immediate electoral battle, and I say this because, Achin would remember, in the immediate aftermath of the demolition of Babri Masjid, when we got together and had our demonstrations and things, protests and so on, and we were kind of trying to come to terms with what had happened. And we were there in on many occasions, first forming even the People's Movement for Secularism and so on. And there was this sense, which at least some of us had, that this is now a very, very long-term battle. It is not something which we can just think of in terms of one election or the next election or something. But somehow, what has happened is that we have actually eventually got totally bogged down in, Krishna Kumar once used this term in the context of literacy and the literacy movement, that it is like mopping the floor with the taps on. So basically they are they are setting things on fire, and we are going around with buckets of water trying to douse that fire, but the long-term challenge has actually not been met, perhaps not even been conceptualized. The long-term challenge of the Hindu right comes from the fact, and that's where it is actually distinctive from what you would call European fascism. I have no objection, unlike Achin, to using the word fascism, but we should know that this is not exactly that fascism. There is a direct inspiration that they drew from contemporary fascism, from Italian fascism and Nazism and so on, but there is a large part of it which actually comes from a much longer history. And unless we understand that, and we think it is just a variety of some 20th century fascism, we are going to make the mistake we have, I think, often made, which is to say that from the 1920s, when this formation, the ideological formation, was actually getting systematized, firstly in the work of V.D. Savarkar, and then later it was given organizational shape in the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS. Savarkar actually never belonged to the RSS. He actually also looked down upon the RSS in many ways, because at one level his was a more, he was an atheist himself. He was not into rituals and all that stuff, which RSS's project was slightly different. And I'll just come to the longer term question on which connects to that, which is that when this ideological formation was being put in place, there had already been from the late 19th century onwards a kind of churning in the Hindu middle class literati and so on, who were increasingly coming to, so all the elements that you find in Savarkar or in later Hindutva, actually you will find the germs of that in a Bankim Chandra Chatterjee or Bandha Upadhyay or many thinkers in Bengal, for example, who even use the term Hindutva. So there is a longer history in a way which connects to that. And what is that? There is an even longer history. So now we should definitely mark the break which colonialism and modernity brought, where after ideas of nationalism, history and so on and so forth, a certain kind of conceptualization of Hindus as a nation starts taking place in the thought of V. Savarkar, which is not obviously there in the past, even in the 19th century. But the second thing which we need to remember is that there is a much longer, in fact I would say centuries long project of something called what we should identify as Brahminism. Hinduism actually is only a 19th century, this we know. But somehow when we talk about it, we project it to some ancient times also. It is not an ancient formation. The word Sanatan Dharma also, which has been in currency a lot nowadays, actually only came after when it came into controversy after Udayanidhi Maran's statement. But actually Sanatan Dharma was a statement, a description also, which came as a response to Hindu reformism, to Arya Samaj, Brahma Samaj, Prarthana Samaj kind of reformist sects, because they were opposed to even that reform or modernizing reform within Hinduism, within what was actually coming to be recognized or called Hinduism. It was a description which we have to be very clear, early 19th century, with the coming of colonialism and something. So what the previous history is actually a history of Brahminical hegemony. And that Brahminical hegemony is basically that I think we have to understand to get to the point where we come to the current. That it has, if you are history students, you would know, but otherwise others also I think would have, you should otherwise definitely need to look it up. That practically for the longest time, from let us say the beginning of the first millennium or even before that, actually the Marxist writer Bhupennath Datta, B.N. Datta, who was Swami Vivekananda's younger brother, but he was a Marxist, and he wrote a book called Studies in Indian Social Polity, which is basically his dissertation on caste, and later it was published in the 1940s as a book. Now he said something which exactly Ambedkar also says, that it was with the overthrow of the Mauryan Empire and the establishment of Pushyamitra Shunga's empire, the Shunga Empire. Both actually, B.N. Datta had already called it the Brahminical counter-revolution. And then Ambedkar also actually, so both use exactly the same term. And in fact, B.N. Datta says that the Manusmriti, which is actually a product of the post. So all these Dharmashastras and Manusmriti and the Smritis, etc., are a product of that period. Not the previous period, which was mostly largely dominated by often pro-Buddhist Shudra empires like the Mauryans and so on and so forth. And so this is the period in which and Datta says that this Manusmriti is a declaration of, or the manifesto of the Brahminical counter-revolution. Exactly what Ambedkar had to decide to burn in December 27, 1927. So, my point is that from that period you will see that this Brahminical hegemony has had a what one can call a protean character, which is to say, in Greek mythology there is this sea shepherd kind of character who has no form. You cannot, it's impossible to catch it, and when you catch it, it immediately changes form. Brahminical hegemony is actually that character. It actually adapts itself or changes itself accordingly without conceding on the main question. Varnashram Dharma it will not concede, the hegemony of the Brahmin it will not concede, Vedas it will not concede. But on everything else, it is ready to change form. And that gives it a kind of flexibility or a kind of decentered character which you will not find in any other religious formation or any other. So it is not exactly in that sense a religious formation, it is a form. Brahminical hegemony is a form, and we have to actually start differentiating, if you ask me, between the period of Brahminical hegemony, which is up to colonialism, and the actual formation of something called Hinduism, which is only a early 19th century phenomenon. Of course, there are some sense of a community around this, what later takes shape as Hinduism, but in that, what are counted generally are not the tribes or the social groups which were incorporated into Hinduism in the Puranic period, which is, let us say, from the 5th, 6th centuries onwards till well into 15th, 14th, 15th centuries, when the later Puranas also come. So this is the thing. Now this is the character that you will see in a way when RSS is formed, unlike the clear-cut, well-defined Savarkarite project. Actually the RSS project is a much more Brahminical hegemony project. Not that Savarkar is not for Brahminical hegemony, but in terms of its form, so they are okay with beef eating in Northeast, they are okay with beef eating in Kerala, but they will venerate the cow in North India and so on. So wherever it suits them in different tribal areas. Now it is not just instrumental in that sense, right? We have to understand that this is actually constitutive of what we call Brahminism, what we understand as Brahminism, and that its very character is protean, partly also because there is nothing to define it in terms of a religious dogma. There is no central religious dogma or a text or something to define it. So the only way in which it defines it is something like it's a way of life and so on and so forth, which is again a very protean, formless or a very shifting way where you can always reinterpret what that form of life, what that way of life is. So this is the key thing which actually then, from the point of the formation of the RSS, you will see that it starts more and more. So there is actually a proliferation of organizations, and there is a proliferation of discourses. So in the tribal region, when the Vanvasi Kalyana Ashram works, it doesn't work with the same discourse that it works with. We leftists are a little, we want to have one line. There is no other possibility there. But if you have to confront this beast, you have to remember that one strategy, one line will not work. They have a different strategy for every area, for every section of the population. For tribals there is one, for northeastern tribals there is one, for Chhattisgarhi tribals there is another. So it's not like there is even one single way of approach. They have also connected to local histories and therefore picked out local heroes without allowing it to challenge the overall structure of Brahminical hegemony, which is hegemony of the Brahmins, hegemony of the Vedas and the Varnashram Dharma. So the success has been that it has actually been able for a large part to incorporate even the Dalit Bahujan masses who are oppressed under that hegemony. So this is the only, if you call it a religion, this may be the only religious formation where there is actually no equality even before God. There is no other religion. Every religion, at least you are equal before God. you at least enter the church or the synagogue or the mosque without any restriction. But this is the only religion where actually there is no equality even before God, leave alone human beings. So, and that is I was recently seeing 2 days ago, there was a video which was circulating of some guy who had been collecting funds for the current tamasha which is being enacted. And then he was asked to return it because ये चमारों का पैसा है, इससे वो नहीं होगा, भगवान का काम नहीं होगा, अशुद्ध है वगैरह वगैरह. तो ये जो कैरेक्टर है, you keep the Dalit Bahujan masses under your thumb, nevertheless make them believe they are Hindus. This is actually a complex thing which we need to keep, and therefore our thing has to be long term in both senses also. So election में क्या होगा 2024 में, ये तो एक सवाल है. ये लोग अगर जीतते हैं तो एक चैलेंज है, हारते हैं तो भी चैलेंज खत्म नहीं होता है. Therefore the question has to be of, the second thing is the long term organizations, the long term. So if you look at, let us say, the यूरोपियन फैसिज्म, 10 साल में फैसिज्म बना भी, उसका उदय भी हो गया, स्टेट कैप्चर भी हो गया, और उसके बाद 10-20 साल राज करके वो ख़त्म भी हो गया. यहाँ तो ये 100 साल का प्रोजेक्ट है. 100 साल 1925 से till about the end of the century, they didn't even think of capturing power. वो बीजेपी बना के पहले जनसंघ बना रखा था, फिर बीजेपी बना के छोड़ दिया, and so on, and it was actually not a serious contest for power in the way in which you see in European fascism. So to that extent, I think in many of those things I agree with Ajin. So the point is that ये जो character है where state power, actually this particular formation comes specifically with the rise of Modi. Even Vajpayee's time, that NDA was still a kind of coalition where many things were being managed and so on and so forth and things. So my point is that thinking about it both intellectually in the range of challenges that we have to confront, and in terms of building long-term non-electoral organizations and forums and so on. The second point which I'll try to be very brief now. The second point that we need to keep in mind, of course, is that despite all this is not something which was inevitable. Sometimes when we trace these long histories and so on, there is a tendency to think that this was something inevitable. I think the 2 points we need to consider is that the point of the rise of the Hindu right has to do, one is the very Gramscian point of the crisis of hegemony. Gramsci says in his prison notebooks that the crisis of hegemony is when you suddenly have the old is dying and the new cannot be born, and there is a kind of troop, mass troop movement of the parties, secular, or for the base of the traditional parties towards men of destiny who emerge at this time to take on leadership and so on and so forth. So these men of destiny basically are conjunctural, what today we might call populist dictators or whatever, but those kind of figures who cash in on the failure of the traditional mode of doing politics. So that's one kind of thing which was happening already with the crisis of the Congress system and so on around the end of the 1980s. The specifics I'm not going into because that's a longer thing, and I'm sure there are a lot of things Achin will also have to say. The second thing, let us remember, of a global counter-revolution. Now, I'm using this term counter-revolution very, very considerately for 2 reasons. One, of course, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc and so on and so forth was, I'm not saying that it was something which was done by CIA and all. I'm not taking that position. My point is a counter-revolution in terms of ideas, in terms of a whole set of policies, and in the way we see and think about the world. It heralded a complete shift. And this connects to another aspect of that counter-revolution, which is actually a longer-term one, which has been going on practically from the time of the late 60s, early 70s in the West, but which connects to many things here also, which is and so that is, in both these contexts, the question of culture, you will see, is very central. The rise of the post-New Left, let us say, when questions of identity, racism, queer sexualities, feminism, all these became big challenges. These were also perceived as challenges to the traditional family norm, to the family system, to the patriarchal authority of the father, to miscegenation and so on. All these fears of the small provincial man who troops towards Trump, who troops towards Brexit, and Boris Johnson, who troops towards all these kind of figures in the West, is also the character. So if you see all the anxieties that we see around Valentine's Day or around people of same sex or same-sex love, or people who are or feminism, or minority rights, everything is perceived as a threat to our culture, and this is actually more a question of the relatively more fragile and precarious condition of the provincial middle class, lower middle class Hindu, again within quotes. So that, I think, is the conjuncture, global conjuncture also, and in a way there were many things which are happening here. The main thing which actually comes together and I'll finish with this, the main thing with which this transformation takes place is that in the period 1989 to 91, these three events that followed, 1990s, in 1990 Mandal Commission on the anti-Mandal agitation, 91 the structural adjustment program, and 92 the demolition of Babri Masjid. You will see that in around these three events a whole new discourse comes into play. There are three different histories which come together and three different discourses which actually completely change. So suddenly the oppressed castes, the Dalits and the OBCs, become the oppressors. They are the reservation elite, they are the people who have captured without merit, they have captured all or are capturing all our jobs and so on. That was the whole discourse of the anti-Mandal agitation. With the Hindu right, and the communal question, it is the Muslim and minority rights and vote bank politics, a entirely new set of categories will emerge, which transform now the figure of the minority into the oppressor, and the majority is the oppressed or the victim. Structural adjustment does exactly the same thing. The poor capitalist is now the beleaguered capitalist, the unions have taken over, they are controlling the labor market rigidities, these, that, etc., all this business, that is why we cannot grow, and all that stuff that happens, so that in a way the working class becomes the unions become the oppressor, and the poor capitalist becomes the oppressed who needs to be liberated from license permit Raj and so on and so forth. Now, there may be elements of truth in all of these. The point is that this whole transformation comes together, these three completely different sets of histories and three different sets of discourses come together on a structurally common ground, where they are able to overturn the common sense which was there till then. So that, I think, is something we need to keep in mind, that this was not inevitable. It was something which perhaps has larger structural, global and national coordinates. but is therefore also not something which is which cannot be rolled back or cannot be fought back. So obviously the implication of all that I'm saying is that this is not something which can be fought back simply in the old way in which we thought. It is also something which has to be done in terms of, we have to also start thinking of which basically how the caste and class questions can be brought together, because caste is equally central to the formation of the communal. So the external enemy of the Muslim is actually in a way brought in for the consolidation of Hindu unity, because there is no other ground for Hindu unity. Now that can be challenged, obviously, but it can be challenged, and if Brahminism, despite keeping the Shudras and Atishudras in a subordinate position, in an oppressed condition, can make them Hindus, I think it is possible to do the reverse also. And so that is the kind of approach I think one would need to take to fight. Thank
Thank you very much for inviting us here. It's really very